So, welcome to this episode of Menopause Conversations. My name is Amantha King. I'm a workplace menopause coach and consultant. We build programs for assisting organisations to support those going through menopause. And I'm delighted, first of all, to be the host of this podcast, but also to have my wonderful guest, Jean Hewitt from Buro, Happold. Hello, Jean. How are you?
Hi, really well. Thank you for having me.
No, you're welcome. So let me tell you a little bit more about Jean, because on this podcast, as you know, we talk about things like stories, science, systems that shape the menopause experience. And I happened to come across Jean at the launch of the British Standard 30416, which is all about menstruation, menopause, and menstrual health. But let me tell you, Jean is a fantastic person to have in the room. She's an accessibility and inclusion specialist at Buro Happold. She's got an absolutely deep passion for creating spaces that serve everybody's health, dignity, and well-being. She also has a role, a voluntary role, appointed by the Cabinet Office. So she's a disability access ambassador for the built environment. So I can't think of anyone better to have this conversation with. And she has absolutely decades of experience in inclusive design. Her work with the British Standards Institute, as I say, is a really powerful piece of work. And she's a leading voice in shaping environments that are not only accessible, but truly supportive. So we're going to sort of think about things like office temperature regulation, acoustics, lighting, access to rest spaces. Jean is a champion for all of that. Because it's really important to consider the physical, emotional, and cognitive needs of people in all life stages, not just menopause, but in all life stages. So, Jean, welcome to Menopause Conversations. We're so pleased to have you. So, tell us a little bit about how you find yourself in the area of inclusive design, accessibility sort of intersects, and particularly the lived experience of menopause. Where did your career start, and how is it that you find yourself here today?
So I've had a career that's kind of transitioned a few different roles. I did 15 years or so in facility and environment management as a consultant, space planning, relocation management, etc. I did a master's at UCL and was told basically that I probably wouldn't make it in that sector because I cared too much about people. I think that's a short sell of FM actually. But I found out I was doing a lot of writing. I do a lot of writing still, and I was writing then. I was doing a lot of writing for Corona publications on various aspects of managing buildings, and they asked me to write about the DDA. And so I did a special report and met people, and then ended up doing a full master's in disability
And
access.
what's a DDA?
So it was the original Disability Discrimination Act, which is still
Right.
used as a loose term to describe accessibility, but it's a bit of a myth because actually nothing is DDA compliant because even the first act and now the Equality Act, neither of them prescribe anything for buildings. But that term's still kicking around. But I was asked to write about the DDA.
Right. Okay. So, gosh, it just shows your breadth and depth of experience.
Yeah, that was back in 2001.
Wow.
And I just thought this area is for me. This is all about people, and this is what I want to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
amazing, amazing. So
And I've been
if you don't mind sharing with us, I mean, do you have an experience of menopause yourself? I mean, what is your interest in that topic?
so I done a lot of writing and contributions to various BSI publications because of the accessibility role. And then I just heard a whisper that this standard was coming out about the menopause. And I said, oh, is something going in about the built environment? Because that's an important aspect. And they said, no, we'll put you in touch. So I was really pleased to be last minute kind of addition to that drafting team. And the reason I was so passionate about it was a couple of reasons actually. My own experience was I I I had fibroids, so many women on listening to this will have gone through that, and you get a lot of flooding. It's a lot of unfortunate incidents and embarrassing moments through that. Um, and had a hysterectomy at 38, which stopped it, thank goodness.
Yeah.
Um, but actually, my menopause bit was actually fairly straightforward. But when you fast forward, my daughter had cancer and she had to have an ovectomy and then had a early menopause as a result. And we were told by the consultants, I was quite shocked by the language they used about how aggressive and life-changing this menopause was going to be for her. And
Wow.
she, a very proactive young lady, and did a lot of research and found out all about all sorts of different products like bamboo sheets and all sorts of things came out. And when I said to her, "Oh, I've got an opportunity to contribute to this," she was very keen for me to do so. But she said, "Can you make it broader? Because the experiences I've had have also happened to some of my friends with endometriosis
Mm.
and having IVF treatment. And then started to think about people gender transitioning. And I thought, no, this is so much bigger and so important and affects millions. So I thought, yes, let's get some built environment stuff in there because I know how important it is to have ways to cool yourself, ways to refresh, all of these kind of things in the built environment. You need to be in the right environment to support your needs, as you do with any disability or health need. This is
Yeah.
very much the same. So that's kind of why I wanted to get some content in there. It's only about 5 pages in that, Paz, but I think to me it's a really important 5 pages because people can use it and hopefully make workplaces and other places better.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really piqued my attention because I came to the launch of BS 30416 and I was just totally captivated. You know, when you sort of think, how did I not know that? You know, I sort of would think I'm reasonably knowledgeable about the subject, but it hadn't occurred to me the built environment. And I think that's probably because I spent all of my career not in a built environment. I was a medical representative. I was always in my car. I was always traveling around. I was making use of facilities in my location wherever I was. I knew where every toilet was in every doctor's surgery or public loo or coffee shop. But actually, that just hadn't occurred to me. And I suppose it brings me, I mean, thank you for sharing your personal experience and that of your daughter, because I think that's what brings this to life, isn't it? I think very two-dimensionally we could sort of read a piece of paper and go, okay, so we need to make some provisions here, but it's these lived experiences that I believe really build the need for change. When we hear about people, you know, I was saying to you a little bit earlier before we started recording that, you know, I was literally menstrually flooding every sort of 16 days, and for 8 days I couldn't leave the house. The idea of being in a workplace would be so stress inducing. I just don't think I would have been able to be in a place of work. Not back then, certainly. And sadly, I'm wondering if I could be there now if I was experiencing that, because I see a lot of requirement for change. So I suppose it brings me on to my next question, is that many workplaces are still designed around a default male perspective. You know, often overlook design features like temperature, lighting, noise that can significantly impact women, like you say, at any stage, not just through menopause. So I suppose what can we do about that, and how does your role facilitate any change in that area?
Well, what was really interesting to me was when I started to look at the menopause and what would we put into a standard. I had not long finished the PAS 6463, which is a design for the mind, neurodiversity in the built environment standard around neurodivergent conditions where the sensory aspects are different, and that can be sensitivity to lighting, noise, temperature, and other visual matters and touch and so on. But there was quite a vast amount of it actually that was directly relevant to menopause as well, which makes me think that actually we need to kind of include the sensory and neuro-friendly and neuro-affirming environments for everybody. And that will then include a vast amount of people, even beyond neurodivergence, which is probably something between 20 and 40% of the population. Then you add into that the component that is women going through menopause, um, younger women with menstrual things, childcare, child planning, and that sort of thing. Huge,
Yeah,
huge numbers. But there was such an overlap. So, for example, lighting is a big thing, and the color temperature of lighting, the adjustability of lighting, and there isn't a one size fits all on this. So, some of the more successful environments now would be looking at providing adjustability over your desk,
yeah,
adjustability in meeting rooms, making it much more comfortable. We know that sometimes in really hot environments, it's helpful to have a cooler light to make you feel cooler colors and so on. But when you're feeling too hot, being able to adjust the lighting when you can become much more susceptible to headaches and migraines during hormonal fluctuations, if I call it that. So it doesn't matter
mm,
if it's your period or your menopause or
yeah,
whatever,
exactly.
perimenopause, whatever's going on, those things happen to us. So I think it's designing for sensory comfort was a key aspect. I mean, there are other things in the menopause guide, such as, being able to not insisting on a particular fabric for uniforms, like a lot of workplace uniforms in the past were nylon or very artificial,
Yes.
going for a cotton breathable fabric. Can you imagine wearing one of those stifling uniforms when you're having hot flushes, for example? It would be horrendous. So
Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of people with neurodivergent conditions experience menopause differently anyway, but also have um, different temperature sensitivities as well.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. I mean, I just artificial lighting for me is all I feel quite sick even at the thought of it. That blue strip lighting, very white. I feel I think because I have quite a sensitive nervous system. And what I mean by that is we know there's emerging evidence showing that our sex hormones don't just exist in isolation. They partner up with our neurotransmitters. And this is why we become much more sensitive, much more possibly irritable, hyper-focused, procrastinating. It's because that's the impact on our neurotransmitters. But for me, to sit in a what I call warm light environment, so I've got my warm light on here at the moment, is lovely because I'm having to block out the sunlight. But actually, if I go into like offices with that strip lighting, I can feel headaches coming on. So I love the idea that you said about being able to alter the lighting over your desk specifically. That sounds absolutely amazing. And I suppose the thing is, I would imagine is the build sort of environment quite male dominated anyway. Have we got a lot of men designing buildings,
I think
or is it changing?
I think it's changing. I think historically it was a typical, your architect would be male and your building control officer would be male, and that there is some transitioning there, and a lot of architects obviously are female now. I don't know what the proportion is. I think it's quite high.
Yeah.
Um, and and I think with that we're seeing a gradual, change in appetite and understanding as well that's moving the goalposts and saying that men particularly got it wrong, but if what you don't know, what you don't know. And we do know so much more about neurocognitive processes, how we all have different brain types, how we all thrive in different types of environments, and the sensory aspects to that, how we react to heat. And like, we know that heat, for example, is really experienced quite differently often for women. Our surface temperature of our skin is different to men.
Yes.
That alone makes us much more sensitive to extremes. And
Yeah.
then we add into that the hormonal stuff going on. It can be very, very different experience. But I have had men come forward as well and say, I have this too. I had a pituitary tumor for 20 years, which was medical
Right.
before, and then it shrinks and dies during menopause. It's a good thing. Um,
Okay.
so it's a tiny little thing, but it affected my body temperature. So
Wow.
actually, the hot flushes from menopause were comparable with some of the temperature swings that I would have got with that, which would have been not quite as rapid as a hot flush, but certainly overheating during the day when I was active. But in the evening, as soon as I sat still, I went to sleep, freezing cold. So you could fully appreciate how awful it is when the temperatures, your temperature
Yeah.
playing up, and you don't have that thermostat that you should have.
No, it's so interesting because we do know that the window of like from cool to hot actually shortens, which is
Yeah.
why we go so quickly into those hot flashes. I met someone quite recently. I won't even say what profession they're in, but I met someone recently who actually, in a hospital environment, had to book themselves into a suite where there was air conditioning because it was so impossible for that person to be able to function for their role that afternoon. They said I had to literally book out a room because it's the only room that had air conditioning in it. So, the reality is we need people to be able to feel comfortable wherever they are. And I think it's comfort is the key word. We hear this said a lot that, people don't mind being a little bit on the warm side or a little bit on the cool side, but as long as they feel comfortable. And I think that's the thing. When we don't feel comfortable, that's when we start to feel quite distracted. I have interviewed someone else on this podcast who had a really clever clothing actually. It was sort of NASA technology where that, when you're hot, it absorbs the heat, and then when you're cooler or maybe on the cold side, the heat is then discharged back to your body. So it's actually really clever, and I actually wear those products myself. I find them really good for just keeping me comfortable, so not having to think, do I need to be cool or do I need to be hot? I just feel comfortable all day, whatever's going on. So I think you've really tuned into something really powerful there. So when we think about them, there is still a large amount of stigma and silence around the topic of menopause. I know, we've had a good 3, 4 years of a lot of noise, gradually increasing, sort of peaking. We sort of think that everyone knows what they need to know, but sadly that isn't the case. So how do you think architecture and layout can actually support or encourage more of these inclusive conversations, Jean? Do you think there's a connection there?
I do, and I think there are going to be, particularly with energy saving, there are certain areas of the building which are no longer routinely heated, like your stair calls, quite often. They're quite often not heated anymore. Now they're going to be cooler, and I think what we need to do is give people access to that, let them know where they are. So there's something called sensory mapping, which can work very well for neurodivergent people, but it works equally well for this if you include temperature.
Okay.
Temperature, light, heat, noise, all those things you might be less tolerant to at certain times during many perimenopause or on your period or hormonal changes, pregnancy, etc. So all of those things, if you had a sensory map of what was going on in the built environment, so your typical office environment, and you knew that one side, because most people are hybrid working and hot desking. So it's not like you have your desk and you've got your comfort at your desk and it's fixed all the time for you. Unless you've got a disability that needs that, it's much more likely you'll be kind of hot desking or temporary desking, whatever you call it. Um, so I think what that gives is choice. So you could look at, if you knew the sensory map, you could look and say, right, for the morning, I'm going to book a desk over in this corner. A, it's near the washrooms, which I might need quickly. B, I know that's the cooler side of the building in the mornings because the sun's on the other side, and it's going to have less glare, and so I can manage that light on. And and there might be other, and it's near the stair core. So you could make choices in the same way as a neurodivergent people person would perhaps choose somewhere quieter
Yes.
so they can hyper focus. And you talked about hyper focus and procrastination, and that is a huge part of many neurodivergent conditions as well as being something that happens to you sometimes. So I think a lot of the stuff that has been done on neurodiversity in design also helps people going through many of the hormonal changes that we have to live through.
Yeah, I think that's really, really powerful because you know, that I can see why. I mean, you have been brought in to work on standards and guidance. I mean, I guess the question is, what changes would you like to see across public buildings, offices and even homes to support midlife women and people experiencing hormonal changes? And when I say women, I'm also including transgender people within this conversation and those that are non-binary. So when I heard you speak, I think the thing that totally piqued my interest was this whole thing about biophilic design and biomimicry. I was like, oh, it just sort of blew my mind when I was sat there thinking, gosh, that is amazing. So could you answer that question and also include a little bit about those two things? That'd be amazing.
Right. So the first question had a few different
Yeah,
categories of
so working on, what changes would you like to see implemented across buildings, public buildings, office spaces? What could we really focus on that could make a big difference? And actually, how do those elements of biomimicry and biophilic design possibly help as quick wins also for people?
I think so. And there is a move to kind of more plants in places, but I don't think that on its own is enough. So the biophilic approach is about connection with nature. We all have this innate connection with nature. It makes us feel calmer, etc. And so bringing some of that nature inside in a form of biomimicry or the actual plants themselves. So you and I have both got at this moment pictures on the wall of nature because it makes us feel nicer than just having a blank wall. We can turn and look at it. I can look out the window as well, and it's a nice tree moving in the rain and things like that. Even though it's a busy road out there, I just focus on the tree.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
lovely.
so all of these things, but even having natural products materials in your environment, such as having a timber desk instead of a plastic or MDF desk, have a granite worked or a stone worktop or stone floor, things that we touch and feel can feel very therapeutic, and you can
Mm,
imagine the feeling if you're going through a hot flush, being able to go off to the toilets, take your shoes off, and stand on a cold stone floor is what I would do at home
yes.
to kind of bring you down, and then a bit of cold water on the face, etc. So I think building design and the biophilic elements are really, really helpful. they're not going to be probably enough on their own. But even things like, which happens more now in buildings because of energy and carbon footprint, is that we have the ability sometimes now to open a window.
Yes.
And it's that feeling. I always think it's about control, giving the user back some control of the environment around them is super helpful. And that could be a desk lamp on your desk that gives you a warmer bathing of light, or it could be a window that you can reach and open. I always used to be, when I was every day in the office in London at Buro Happold, I asked for a window desk. So I could have plants, but I could open the window. The rad was there as well, so that could be a problem. And there was another person who's kind of saying, "Can you turn the rad up?" Like, do I have to? So I'm just going to go and have some meetings somewhere else because
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just to work
that's
around
the,
it.
the tricky thing in offices, of course, and workplaces is the temperature because there's going to be a huge variation what people, and I think it's a tricky one. But if you know, that's why I say the sensory mapping. If you know the cooler side and you don't heat everywhere the same,
Yeah.
I think that's helpful. And
And
I think
is it true, Jean, that things like air conditioning are preset to or calibrated for men's temperature rather than women's temperature? Because you have said that there is a difference in surface temperature for us. Is AC generally calibrated more for or office temperatures? Are they calibrated more for males or females, or is that not true?
um, I'm not sure about it's a health and safety guidance on what the parameters are for that, and then the engineers are setting it. So they
Right.
can go warmer. You will often find women turning it up, particularly in the winter.
Because it's set cooler.
Yeah, but but probably 1 degree difference, which is the surface. I think that's the surface temperature of our skin difference as well.
Right.
Um, but it's not a given. It can be that a man feels very cold,
Yeah.
and I also find the more active I am, the hotter I am anyway. So
True.
there's
And
a lot
if you've been sat at your desk all day, some days I'm sat here for
really
far too long
cold.
and I haven't moved and I just cannot get warm then. So it is that conundrum, isn't it? And I suppose that also is part of this whole thing around moving within our spaces, so that we still are comfortable. And I would like to acknowledge that point about for men as well. We know that testosterone decline in men is real. And so they will also experience similar symptoms. People going through cancer treatment, people who've had a surgical menopause, people who are having prostate cancer treatment, whatever you're going through, these are things that challenge our bodies and our levels of comfort. And so it really is important that we think about that. I can control my environment because I'm in a home office, but actually, if you're one of those people, and I'm hearing more and more, I don't know if you're hearing this, I'm hearing about people who are being forced to come back to the office environment en masse, or the terms of your current contract are no longer attainable. Lots of companies are putting renew contracts in place, giving people sort of 12 months to 18 months to get their head around it. And you have to sign up to say, yep, I'm coming back to the new terms and conditions or not. I'm hearing a lot of that.
Okay.
And I
I
think
guess
that's
unfortunate,
concerning.
ours is more flexible, and that we're not presenteeism, so we kind of value the work people do wherever that happens, and recognize that some people perform better in other environments or working more flexibly. I'm somebody who likes to go into the office for meetings and then pop back home again to do concentrate work, but I'm near enough to do that if I
Yes.
can. So I think the sit stand desk, coming back to kind of what's in the building, can be really, really helpful because actually when you've got period pains and certainly during menopause, if you can move, you feel like you've got kind of more control. But you
Definitely.
also, if you're feeling cold, it's better to be moving
Yes,
because then it's got
definitely.
the circulation going. So I've got a sit stand desk and I would choose one when I go to the office. But what you need to do is set some reminders that you don't just stand all day because that's really bad for the ankles as well to stand
Yes.
still. So if you're somebody that kind of naturally sways and moves around a bit when you're talking, that works quite well. But
Yeah.
also you need to sit some of it too. So and nothing is the whole solution. It's all about the flexibility and for people to control that. So I can control it when my feet feel, oh, I need to sit down for a while now. Or I'm feeling cold and I'm going to stand up and I'm gonna walk while I'm listening to this meeting and I don't have to have my camera on. There are lots of ways that I think it's actually more flexible now since post COVID
Yes.
on helping people to kind of self-manage menopause and other hormonal changes.
Yeah,
That's what
absolutely. And that leads nicely into the next question, which is that, as you've said throughout this interview, that hormonal changes can be experienced by women, men, as well as people going through gender transition. So how can we cater for the needs of these people? So when we think in a building, either a building you're visiting or a building you're working in, how can their needs be catered for?
I always sum up um, this type of thing with the sensory stuff under three C's. So the first is to give clarity to a space, make it easy to understand, use, find places, find the toilets, know where you're going, and sensory mapping contribute to that. The second one is so that part of the clarity, then control, giving users back some control. I know where I'm going, I know where I can choose my desk, I know where the toilets are, I know what condition they're likely to be in. Self-contained toilets are really a godsend. If you have a self-contained toilet room with a basin in it, that is your dream scenario for menopause, because you might want to cool down by splashing your face, and you don't really want to do it in the more public area. But there's all sorts of flooding and other situations going on, sustainable menstrual products, etc., etc. As well as the other conditions such as stoma management or all of those things that benefit from a basin, a mirror, and a shelf. And I think if we had more self-contained toilets, um, both all gender and male and female, so I think we need all three,
Yeah.
and of course accessible versions of those and ambulance accessible versions of those, then that's what's going to meet everybody's needs, and it'll give you a much more robust building going forward if you have those regularly throughout the building.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I just told you a little short story before we recorded, which was when I was at the NHS conference in Manchester. I was there as in my role as an ambassador for Egal Pads on a Roll, which is a roll which sits next to the toilet roll. So it's just for managing another fluid. I'm doing a small pilot in my local gym actually, and because we've got QR codes on there, we ask people to respond to some questions and give their thoughts and feedback. And one of the things I'm delighted to say is all genders are using those pads on a roll. They're not just being used for menstrual or menstruation. They're being used for managing any fluid. And in fact, we've had a couple of people signpost through the QR code that they are actually male and using it either for prostate issues, urinary incontinence. And so I think you're absolutely right. I think if we can have everything in the cubicle, and yes, it will mean bigger cubicles, but I think that's okay, because if people can manage everything inside the cubicle with dignity, I think we have people exiting that washroom facility feeling like a little bit more in control, a little bit more confident, a little bit more ready to get on with the rest of their day. And I think that shows in productivity for people. And maybe we might see more people coming into office spaces if there's that degree of thought and care um, made available for them. So I agree with you. I really like the idea of those self-contained toilets and all gender, male and female as well. So I think that's fantastic. So I
I mean,
suppose, sorry.
I was just going to say the other thing that I think is good about the all gender cubicle is if you're out with, you might be going through menopause, you've got young children, you've got them with,
Yes.
and then you suddenly need a toilet with a wash basin and everything. You're not going to have to go and steal the accessible from disabled people. You could go into any of those self-contained toilets and take your child with you.
I love that, and also grandparents looking after children, or someone who's someone with a relative who's poorly or sick or needing help whilst they navigate their way through the washroom facilities. I think you're absolutely right. It's
The,
like a
the issue
no-brainer.
is, yeah, the boys over the age of 8 are not meant to go into the ladies' toilet. So that I can't think of any mum or grandmother who would want to let an 8-year-old boy go off into the gents on their own if you're out in a public place. So
So say that again.
a
If you're
boy over 8,
over
you're not
8,
meant to go, you're not meant, and I've got an 8-year-old grandson and he's the height of a 12-year-old.
yeah,
You get some tutting, but like, well, so your other options to take the accessible toilet, and which I hate doing because that is there really dedicated for disabled people and needed very much for that purpose. So I would have to be very careful and kind of wait around on when I chose to go and use that facility because I wouldn't want to make anybody wait that needed that
yeah.
toilet.
So it takes the guesswork out of all of it, doesn't it?
Yeah,
By
so
just having it.
if you can put a plethora of all gender self-contained toilets alongside whatever other provision you choose to have, I think that's a really helpful thing to do.
Yeah.
And it's certainly a key one for menopause and menstrual.
Definitely, definitely. So we're sort of heading towards the end of our conversation, but I suppose for if we think about people who watch this, we have a lot of people experiencing menopause and midlife transition themselves. But we also have a lot of people in HR, leaders, managers who watch this podcast. So for them, I guess the employers and facility managers or even home renovators, what's one practical change they can make to create a more menopause supportive space? What could they do?
I mean, I think allyship and conversations are really, really helpful because sometimes, and this is doesn't happen that often, but sometimes someone can be quite dismissive of it and say, "Oh, it's just just something else I've got to consider." I've got a wife, I've got a daughter. I know about menopause. Like, no, you don't know until you've been through it, or you've lived closely with someone who's really.
Exactly.
And menopause isn't always an awful journey. Sometimes mine actually was very smooth. But I do recognize for many people it can be pretty horrible at times. And I think built environment has got such a big role to play, and we can do this. We should
Yeah.
be designing buildings for everyone, shouldn't we?
Yes, because as we know, if we then sort of extend that to what we know in business, the McKinsey report says every time they do a report, the most successful teams are the ones which have the greatest degree of diversity. I mean, Darwin was saying this, the theory of evolution says that as well. So, why would it be any different in business? If we're going to be successful, we need diverse people at that table. And that includes those with disability, those living with life limiting sort of situations or conditions, those people who are navigating problems or issues or challenges. We need to have those people in the workplace. So to make it helpful, comfortable, usable, I think that supports that, doesn't it? And I suppose we can't help but maybe think, actually, what about the organisations that don't really see this as being important? How can we make it important to them? Is there anything you can say, Jean, that says actually just turning a blind eye isn't good enough? From your experience, what would be
I
the
think,
mandate for it?
I mean, the Equality Act goes so far on trying to encourage people to do the right thing. The Health and Safety Act is often overlooked, and kind of what that requires of workplaces. But you are meant to meet everybody's needs within reason. But I think the biggest one is probably attracting good staff and keeping them. And we know when we look at neurodiversity, for example, if you don't offer the right type of spaces, then gifted neurodivergent people will go off and find a job somewhere else. So you will
100%
be losing
agree.
staff. So if you want the best people to work for you, and actually that's what makes money, isn't it? It's the right people in the right place. You need to do this, and I think there is some recognition of that, but I think we've probably got to get more standards like the BS 30416, which obviously has transitioned to international standard now. Hence, on the basis of its popularity and need. Um, we need things like that to kind of push, and we need those to go probably into building regs eventually to say, there is this need, and this is what should be considered.
Yeah, I agree with that massively. And I think that's why it just hadn't occurred to me how powerful your environment is in sort of facilitating this topic, this agenda, and actually supporting people. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just amazing. I mean, I guess I suppose one last thing to finish off with is if you had a hope for the menopause space specifically, what would be your one hope?
That we didn't have to think about it, that the designs that we were coming up with didn't make it necessary for anyone to disclose that they were going through anything, anywhere. And the facilities just naturally provided for what you needed and had that flexibility. Wouldn't that be
Yeah,
great?
that
You didn't
would that would
say
be
I'm special in any particular way. It's just there, and not noticeable until you need it.
Yeah, and I think that's so true. So many of the people we speak to through our work say, I just want to carry on. I don't want to be treated any differently, quite frankly. And for a lot of people, it's like, I don't want any more focus on myself than I already am putting on myself. I don't want people feeling sorry for me. I don't want people feeling it's an issue. I definitely don't want any eye rolling around, this, that, and the other, because there is a lot of that still goes on. And people need to be careful of that, quite frankly, and certainly around the humour around it all. But I think people just want to just come to work, do a good job, feel some sense of empowerment and fulfillment, and then go home and do whatever they want to do. So I agree with you. I mean, for me, this has been a fantastic conversation. Like I said, I was inspired when I've heard you speak, and I just knew it would be wonderful to have you on. So what's next for you? What are the big things that you're looking at or focusing on when you think about building design? Is there anything that you could tease up for us that's coming or going to be sort of
Yeah.
fairly important?
I'm beginning to look at schools and heritage visitor places. There's also some work going on at BSI with suicide prevention, access to means, because it's a huge part of mental health. So I think mental health and mental well-being in the workplace, we need people to flourish,
Yes.
not just function. And this is part of it. I think this is what a true inclusion means, is that we try and predict and anticipate every possible need we can, and have got ways of accommodating it, either through the way we've designed a building or the way we manage the building or the policies and procedures that we have in place.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I think that's a perfect place to end on because, it really does matter. We spend a lot of time at work, don't we? And
I mean,
actually,
buildings,
a
yeah.
lot of time in buildings. Yeah, that's a better way of saying it, actually. A lot of time in buildings. And when you've found a really great building, I did a little bit of work with, I will name them Opencast, because they are in the northeast and no, sorry, the northwest. No, is it northeast? Yeah, no, it's the northeast, isn't it? Newcastle, in the northeast. And it was absolutely beautiful, Jean. From the moment I walked in through the door into the reception area, I was actually excited because it just looked like a really inviting environment. I was made aware where the facilities were. The facilities were all fully stocked. They did have wash basin in, they did have menstrual products, and just the open spaces and the light. For me, I actually said to someone, I would love to come and work here every day. And I think that's testament, isn't it? I mean, it's going to challenge to get it right for everybody, but certainly for me, who's someone who's not, I always say actually, I'm not built for the built environment. I need to be free. I need to be out and moving. But I could really sense that that would be a place where I would flourish and thrive because it was interesting, it was different. They had art in there, they had sculptures, they had natural lighting, everything, even down to how the food was served at the cafeteria, was absolutely stunning. So I'd like to say a big shout out to Opencast. They really have put a lot of thought into it, and I'm sure other organisations have too. Another company I've been into has a beautiful restaurant, a pharmaceutical company. They've got a really beautiful restaurant, which again, when you're eating your lunch and you're bathed in natural light, it sort of feels really great. So thank you for informing us, enlightening us, bringing to our attention what we could be doing differently, Jean. So for now, Jean Hewitt from Buro Happold, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing some more updates, probably get you back when the ISO standard is fully up and running. But for now, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.